Let's start off with this. A lot of people don't know your actual background, like where you came from, because folks sort of exist in the immediate ecosystem. So,
yes, they do.
Where did you come from? Where did you grow up? How did you become Tucker Carlson, the biggest host on cable news?
I mean, I filled a job that was open. I mean, chance plays a massive role in life, which is part of the thesis of my book, and it's unacknowledged. But I grew up here, actually, and I'm from Southern California originally. I lived right here in Los Angeles, very close to where we are right now. I actually went to first grade in this town. And then I moved to La Jolla, and then I went to high school and college on the East Coast and kind of stayed in Washington, where my family had moved to work for the Reagan administration. And I've been there ever since, and I've had a series of jobs, mostly in print, magazines, newspaper, and then website, and then worked at CNN, MSNBC, PBS, and ABC, and Fox. So I've just kind of been always in the world that I occupy now with varying degrees of success based partly on the amount of effort I was exerting in the job I was in and also based on luck and things you can't control. So
what sort of shaped where you are politically right now? Because if I look at your political career, you were much more aggressive on foreign policy in the early 2000s, for example. Now you're much more isolationist on foreign policy. Well, how did you move? Can you kind of chart your political movement over time?
Yeah, I mean, I have always tried to be much more than right. I've tried to be evidence-based. I don't, especially as I age, I believe less in theories or constructs, and I believe more in results. And I also believe in honesty. And so if you think that the policy that you're proposing will, reach a certain conclusion, produce a certain result, and it doesn't, I think you should acknowledge that. And I think you ought to change your views based on the evidence. And so to bottom line it in a sentence, America has changed so dramatically in the 49 years that I've been here that, why wouldn't my politics change? They've changed completely on all kinds of different issues. I mean, I was once pretty stridently pro-choice and for the death penalty, and now I have very strong feelings in the opposite direction. I've supported all kinds of things that turned out to be wrong, but that's the point. They turned out to be wrong. So you should reassess. And what drives me insane in living in Washington for 35 years is watching people make these grand decisions with the best intentions, by the way. I think most of our policymakers have good motives. I do think that. I know them. But they watch their policies fail. They don't acknowledge that they have failed. To the extent they do, they blame the population for their failure, and then they repeat the mistake. I have a bunch of children. I'm never surprised when they make a bad decision, ever, because people do. They're human. I am too. What I require is that they acknowledge that they've made a mistake, that they say sorry, and that they try better based on what they've learned from that mistake. And that's exactly what doesn't happen in Washington, and that's why I'm mad.
So when it comes to ideology, so I actually am a stronger believer in ideology than you are. One of the reasons being, it seems to me that the way that we determine whether an appropriate metric for success has been achieved is ideologically based, meaning that we can both look at the same policy and I can say that its goal was achieved, and if you're using a different ideology, then maybe its goal has not been achieved. So what's your metric for success on particular issues?
So I guess I move by instinct increasingly, again, as I age. Your view changes, I think. Mine has. The way you measure things changes. I increasingly distrust complexity in worldview. So I start with where I want to end up. What's the goal? What kind of society do you want to live in? You want to live in a place where the family is basically unmolested, where the human conscience is totally unmolested, where you acknowledge you can control people's behavior. You can tell people you can't do that. We all have to live together. You can't sleep in a crosswalk. Sorry, it's not allowed. But what you never do is try to control or mandate what people believe. That is a kind of, that's a sphere that you would never violate. And so in the end, you want to live, if you're in a democracy, any democracy, you want to live in a country where the middle class, normal people, with 100 IQs making 80 grand a year can lead, productive, meaningful lives unbothered by the people in power. And they have the hope, at least, that their kids can do slightly better than they have. That was kind of the rule for a lot of certainly the post-war period in this country, and it no longer is. So my question always is not what party wins or, is my economic theory validated or not? It's, can we get back to that? Or can we get as close to that as we possibly can? And we're moving farther away from it. That's my frustration.
So I think that there are a couple issues that you mentioned there, and I might want to bifurcate them for purposes of the discussion. So issue number one is sort of the free speech issue. People should be able to say what they want. People should be able to lead their families how they want to lead them. There we're in complete agreement.
Right.
And I think that the unity of the right is largely based on agreement on this particular point.
That's
idea
right.
that
The foundational questions, without which none of the rest is possible. And
Right.
then free expression would be one, of course, and freedom of conscience.
Right, and you talk a lot in Ship of Fools, particularly about the threat to these sorts of ideas from a left that is focused on a sort of forced diversity. And you've been labeled racist by folks at Media Matters for this, of course, because they label everyone a racist. I'm a Nazi, according to Media Matters, because of my yarmulke, apparently. But your viewpoint on diversity is basically, as I see it expressed in the book, that diversity is a neutral. It's not good
It's not
or
a
bad
value.
inherently. It's not a
Right,
value.
it's a description.
Right, and so where do you see the conflict lying between right and left on that particular
Well,
issue?
so where I agree with you is that, while, as I noted, I am distrustful of complex ideologies, I do think that you need to start with certain things that you believe are true and act on them if you want to get to the place you desire to be. So what I just noticed, just as an American, and I'm not an intellectual, I'm a talk show host, so this is a very obvious thing, that our national motto has been redefined to its mirror image. So, of course, it was out of many, one. And now it is diversity is our strength. So I think it's fair if you, without asking my consent, replace the core principle of our country. It's fair for me to ask if that principle is worth organizing a country around. So I just asked the obvious question, is diversity our strength? And of course, like so much they say, it's not only untrue, it's the opposite of what is true. It is never true that diversity is our strength. I'm for all kinds of diversity, but they're not our strength. So in other words, is it true in your marriage? The less you have in common with your wife, the stronger your marriage is? We don't even speak the same language. That's why we love each other so much. Is it true in your business? We don't know what we're all doing here. Is it true in the military? No, it's insane, actually. It's the opposite, once again, of what is true, what is observably true. So I just noted that. And by the way, at the same time I noted it, as I did, 50 nights in the past 200 nights, I made the case explicitly against racism, which is you are not responsible for your immutable qualities. You can't control your height, your hair color, your DNA, what your parents did. None of that is your fault, and you should not be punished for it or rewarded for it. That is an argument against racism, explicitly. And so for that, I'm a racist. It's like, no, you don't understand. I'm arguing against all kinds of racism. I think it's a really dangerous way to see the world. And anyway, whatever. They don't mean anything they say. They throw at you the very things that they are doing in order to silence you. And I just happen for this brief window of my life to have the freedom to say what I think is true, and I'm going to.
It seems to me that this is actually the major rift in American politics. And I want to get to your economics in a second, because I think there we actually have some substantive disagreements.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of talk these days about political realignment. And I wonder if it's not really political realignment that's taking place, but a hunkering down of the far left into the diversity politics, identity politics, and then just the backlash to that. Because it seems to me that was the real dividing line between Obama and Trump, is not even on economics, where in some areas there's actually some sort of populist agreement.
That's exactly
but it's really
right.
on these sort of cultural divisions where President Obama was basically saying, we can be divided into various ethnic groups, all of whom have been victimized by America, and then we can create a coalition of the dispossessed to come back in and sweep into power, and the new demographic shift will basically buoy our boat all the way to victory from now until the end of time. And then the backlash to that was, well, wait a second. You guys don't get to do identity politics when you've been saying that identity politics is what's wrong with America for generations correctly. So why are you doing that now?
Well, as a practical matter, it just doesn't work. I mean, countries don't hang together by accident, particularly large, diverse ones that don't have a majority in any category. So if you don't even have a shared language or history or culture, why would you why would you remain united as a country? And the answer, which I actually believe in, is that you could hang together around a common idea, a common set of beliefs. Here's what we're all for. But our ruling class, and I do think this is the least responsible, the most reckless thing they have done, is they have not only failed to come up with what that set of common beliefs is, they have argued against the fact that it should exist. And so, and what they're doing clearly is, it's not complicated. They're dividing in order to rule, of course, what the British did in India. But that's the shortest term thinking. That's like day trader thinking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what do you think are those common ideals? You say that, there's certain things that you think are just basic to being American. What are those common ideas?
I guess I'd start with the Bill of Rights. That's not hard. Do you know what I mean? Since it is a founding document, it's the foundational document. But I think, look, you'll notice the book is long on diagnostics and short on solutions, because that reflects who I am and what I do. I'm not a policymaker at all. I'm an observer. I'm not a deep systematic thinker. Again, I'm a talk show host.
Right.
So I'm pretty good at telling you what I think is wrong. It's not as clear how you fix it other than go back to the obvious things. Like demand that everybody who comes to this country for economic opportunity, for example, or for the safety of our rule of law, also buy into the things that makes all of us Americans. Like it's not complicated, really. So I would start with the Bill of Rights. Like you have an absolute right as defined in 1967 by the Supreme Court, but also by sort of centuries of tradition here in this country, which we inherited from another culture across the ocean, to believe what you believe. Unmolested, period. It's an absolute right. You can't violate my conscience. And that right is under assault, not by a political party, but by, in effect, a secular evangelical faith, which we're calling progressive or liberal or whatever, but it's not. It's a species of religion that seeks to convert by force and that is deeply anguished and concerned that other people disagree. So like, I doubt you go home tonight and fret at any length over the idea that somewhere in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, someone disagrees with you on an issue. You're just probably not even thinking about it. Exactly.
I'm not famous for my character.
But I can promise you somewhere in Williamsburg right now, someone is lying in a studio apartment fretting that in the far reaches of Red Clay, Alabama, someone's not fully on board with the bathroom program. Like they're really bothered by that. And they need to do something about it. So actually, it's an asymmetrical contest between one group that wants to affect policy outcomes and the other group that wants to convert by the sword. So it's the religious people versus the political people. And I don't even think we acknowledge that most of the time.